Yo, what's going on, guys? Rhys here from More Than Lifting with the More Than Lifting podcast. Conversations about calisthenics, bodyweight training, gymnastics, all that good stuff. I'm Rhys, a personal trainer from the UK and founder of morethanlifting.com, and in this episode we're going to be talking about why range of motion matters. Alright, because it is so important and has such a big impact on the results that you see and your progression and development, because if you ignore such a simple part of your training, then it can have very, very big consequences. And that's what we're going to get into in this episode, okay? Because more range of motion is super important. And yeah, cool. So that's not fanny about me. Let's dive straight in. So first off, what is range of motion? Okay, well, ROM, everyone writes ROM, everyone says range of motion. So ROM is just range of motion. If you ever see that written down anywhere, that's what it means. So what it is it's how far you can move. Yeah, your range of motion is how far your joints and your muscles and your ligaments and your tendons actually allow your arms, your limbs to move. Okay, and this varies from point to point. For example, the range of motion in your shoulders, because of the type of joint it is totally different to the range of motion in your elbows. Okay, because the joint is totally different. The musculature around the joint and the ligaments and everything that operates to enable that movement is totally different. And so that's what it is. Okay, so range of motion is just how far you move. So in an exercise like a bicep curl, the range of motion is how far you can move your elbow. So the angle of your elbow. So for example, you can move your arm completely straight. That's about as far as it goes. And then you can pull it all the way in so that your elbow is squeezed, like on the inside is squeezed really tight, and you can basically touch your shoulder, almost plant your palm. It's quite hard to actually plant your palm onto your shoulder because it's just out of reach, but it's right there, you know? So that's the range of motion. So when you're focusing on the range of motion, you're paying particular attention to how far you're moving doing that bicep curl, okay? And I'm only using a bicep curl because it only has one joint in it, and it's quite a simple exercise. Everyone knows what a bicep curl is. So when it gets to more, so the results you get from your bicep curls are directly correlate to the range of motion that you apply to your bicep curls. So if you're moving at a very small range, yeah, so say you're staying right in the middle, about 45 degrees, 90 degrees, and you're just doing your curl within that space, like doing 10 reps of that isn't the same. It's absolutely not the same as doing 10 bicep curls where you use the full range of motion, where you take your arm completely straight and then you come right in absolutely as far as you can right up to your shoulder. So you almost plant the dumbbell on your shoulder and then extend all the way back down to straight again. All right, just staying in the middle, like 90 to 45 degrees, and doing a full range of motion, which is almost 180 degrees. Yeah, it's not, it's probably about 170, 165. You could not possibly argue that they are equal exercises because you're not moving as much. Yeah, if you were moving as much, so you're not using the same amount of energy, because the person who's doing a full range of motion is expending a lot more energy because the muscle is moving. The eccentric and concentric contraction is at its utmost within the muscle. Yeah, so what that means is your muscles opens all the way out and then it contracts until it can't contract anymore, and it stretches out until it can't stretch no more. So this is good range of motion. Right, so I got a bit ahead of myself. So like I've just explained kind of the difference between good and bad range of motion. Yeah, so good range of motion is moving as far as anatomically possible. Often it is. That's not always the case, because certain exercises you stay within a certain range. So it is not always the case, all right? But generally speaking, you're moving as far as you can. Yeah, you don't want to sit in the middle of an exercise because then why not just move the full amount? It doesn't make any sense to just do tiny little reps. Do full reps, all right? Yeah, so this is a full eccentric and a full concentric contraction of your muscles. Yeah, which means you're stretching them as far as they can stretch. You're opening your bicep as far as you possibly can by opening your arm, straightening your arm out as far as you can. That's as stretched as your bicep gets, because that's responsible for closing up your elbow. Yeah, closing that, punching yourself in the face, if you like. So then you're doing a full concentric contraction, so you're squeezing your arm all the way up. All right, so you punch yourself in the face, so you plant your dumbbell on your shoulder, and that is the full range of motion. So bad range of motion, like I said, then is sitting at 90 to 45 degrees. Like it's essentially not moving very far. Yeah, it doesn't mean that it's between, like it's just a tiny little range. It might be in the middle. And like I say, when it gets to calisthenics exercises, it gets a lot more complicated. All right, so let's have a look at pull-ups. All right, because pull-ups are hard. All right, and there's a lot happening in a pull-up, so you've got plenty of movement to range. So you're not just using your biceps in a pull-up, all right, you're using your biceps, but you're also using your back muscles. Yeah, so remember a couple of episodes we spoke about the two different types of pull-ups? This comes into play here, all right, because when you're doing your posterior pull-up, so you're looking up at the bar and really flexing your back, the idea is to achieve a full concentric contraction of your back muscles. Think rhomboids, and that kind of area, you know, your middle of your back. All right, and when you do this, you achieve it there, but other places you might not, you know, because you can't at the same time. You can't get your shoulders all the way back and fully contract your traps, you know what I mean, which are the ones on top of your shoulders going up to your neck. So there's always an overlap between certain muscles when you're doing such a compound exercise, which is something that uses multiple muscle groups rather than something like a bicep curl. So a pull-up, yes, you're working your biceps, you're also working on your back, your shoulders, your forearms, you know, there's loads of things going on. Your good range of motion in your pull-up is going from a complete hang to as high as you possibly can, whether it's like, okay, so a muscle up, that is overdoing it. Obviously, if you just get above the bar, then, you know, that's too far. Okay, but whether you're doing your anterior things, you can basically just bash in the bar with your chest, just getting right up there like that. Ugh. And this is fully opening out your chest, fully extending, contracting your rhomboids. And like, if you do it just where you stand now, you basically get your arms all the way behind you as far as you can. Like that's the contraction you're trying to achieve doing those posterior pull-ups. When you're doing the anterior ones, you basically don't quite get there with your rhomboids unless you get high enough to get your elbows right behind you. Okay, which is the aim when you're doing pull-ups. Okay, is get your elbows as far behind as you can. Yeah, so when you're doing your anterior, which is where you have like your hollow body position, doing your pull-up with your legs out slightly in front of you. Here you go a lot further, okay, because you're not just coming straight up to the bar. You go from a full hang, you come up to the bar, then you come around it slightly. Okay, so your head gets well clear of the bar and your chest gets right up next to it. Okay, the higher you can get, the better. But like I say, muscle ups are still a bit far because it's just a different exercise, guys. You're doing your dips as well. So here then, you want to get your elbows as far behind you as you can. And if you do, you kind of, I mean, okay, it's debatable what you're contracting quite as much because I don't have a bar for my hands right now to simulate it and try and work it out. But basically, you are working a lot of that, you know. And when you can get higher up to the bar, you're working other muscles just as much, if not more, than when you're doing some of your posterior pulls. Okay, so your anterior pulls have a greater range of motion than posterior pulls because you can only get so high with your posterior pulls, you hit the bar, that gets in the way of your chest. All right, whereas with your anterior pulls, yeah, the ones where you do with a hollow body as opposed to a hollow back where you're leaning and looking up at the bar. These ones you can pull the bar down in front of you as if you were going to do a muscle up and not quite going all the way. Keep your elbows down and pull them back. And when you do this, you actually work your forearms quite a lot more because you're almost simulating getting into that transitionary position for the muscle up, you know, where you're transitioning between your pull and your dip, that position, which is so hard to work. All right, guys, just in case you weren't aware of that, that is the hard part of the muscle up, that transition. Okay, so basically I went off on a complete ramble then, but it doesn't matter. Okay, that's where range of motion comes in. Okay, because you work a lot of other muscles when you're doing those anterior pulls than you are when you're doing your posterior pulls. All right, you're not working your hamstrings. Okay, but that doesn't matter, does it? So when it comes to other exercises, then you can say that like good range of motion is where you're doing the full range of motion, like say with those pulls. With something like a dip, it would be going to a straight arm and extending your scapula at the top. And when you get down to the bottom, it's getting your shoulders down to your thumbs. Yeah, and obviously you might be limited personally on an individual basis, but that is what like full range of motion is. All right, but that is relative. Yeah, full range of motion is relative because some people can move further than others. All right, so don't always think of full range of motion. Just think of good range of motion, good technique for yourself. Okay, full range of motion does always matter. there's no time where it doesn't matter, right? Range of motion is important. It's something to think about and be aware of going into an exercise every rep. Yeah, every time you do that rep, you need to be thinking about good range of motion, moving as far as you can, unless specifically dictated otherwise by an exercise, by a particular exercise. All right, you want to move as far in one direction and as far in the other, whether it's pulling, whether it's pushing, whether it's flutter kicks. Okay, flutter kicks are one of those ones where it's not necessarily the case, because otherwise you'd kind of be wasting time and energy, like bringing your leg all the way up to your face just to go all the way back down for where your flutter kicks live. Yeah, so flutter kicks are an example of something where range of motion does kind of matter, but you're not using that full range of motion in your exercise. Okay, and I guess that's the difference. There we go. So what are the exceptions then to full range of motion? Okay, other than flutter kicks. Your technique is the first one. Your technique deteriorates over the course of a set, over the course of a workout. Yeah, your first set, fucking fantastic range of motion. You'll fly right above the bar and do like some crazy plyometric pull-up, all right? But then by the time you get to set number 8, all right, you'll be struggling to do that plyo, even though the first one was by accident, all right? Because you're using your muscles, you're wearing them out right from the get-go, obviously your muscles will deteriorate, your technique, your range of motion will deteriorate. Okay, so that's one of the exceptions for good, like perfect range of motion, perfect technique all the time. All right. Another one is you can only go so far. So some people are limited by their anatomy. All right, they haven't been doing stretch classes or like yoga for 10 years, or they weren't gymnasts as kids, or they're not naturally particularly flexible, or for whatever reason, you could only go so far. All right, this is something like dips really comes into play. Pull-ups, not so much. Yeah, because pull-ups, everyone can do that movement, but with dips, you need that kind of backwards shoulder mobility to be able to put your arms from your side. Yeah, so if you put your hands by your pockets and then lift them straight behind you, some people will be able to go further than others just because they can, because they've either trained it or they haven't like trained out of it, whether it's postural or just general muscle tension in the body, and people's general mobility is different. So you can only go so far this is a limitation for you. Okay, you can work on it for a start. The more you do dips, the better you get. If you're focusing on that range of motion the whole time, yeah, you're going to increase your range of motion over time because you're constantly working in those boundaries. You'll be pushing those boundaries, increasing those boundaries every time. All right, well, maybe not every time, but, a lot and frequently. I can't put numbers on it, all right, because it's different person to person. Surely we've established that by now. So fixes. The first fix, for bad range of motion. I'm getting ahead of myself again because I'm so excited about it. Good. Some fixes for bad range of motion is using negatives. Yeah, so negatives are great because you're only doing the eccentric contraction. You're only doing the negative, the extension of the muscle. You're letting gravity do the work, which means you're not really trying very hard because you're not trying to work against gravity. You're just holding on and trying to resist. Yeah, so when you're doing your negatives, whether they're pulls, whether they're dips, whether they're muscle ups, when you're doing something like that, always use the full range of motion. Always go to straight arm, and then release your shoulders to a full dead hang. Always do that, because then you're always working that full range of motion, even if it's just in the eccentric, the negative. Because if you're doing that, and if you do your pull-ups and your pull-up technique is quite bad at the minute, your range of motion is quite bad, like you can still do those negatives even after your entire your workout. You can still do those negatives with a full range of motion. All right, and that way you've like pre-fatigued everything, and then you work your range of motion. Pre-fatigued everything and work your range of motion. I mean, that's quite a good training method. Quite an effective way of increasing the range of motion in your pulls. The next one is straight arm shoulder isolation. Okay, so this is I kind of touched on with your pulls just then, is working your straight arm and your shoulder movement. Yeah, so whether it's your pulls and you go to a full dead hang, you straighten your arms and then release your shoulders to a passive hang. Yeah, and then before you pull up, you activate your shoulders first, isolate that movement, and then work your arms and actually do the pull. That's one way of doing it. Then the next way to look at it is from your dips, from the total opposite, where you go as low as you can, you push up the straight arm, and then you push down to extend your shoulders. Yes, you work that scapular dip as well, because even as your technique deteriorates over time, yeah, you can still focus on that, and even if the range of motion isn't good, even if the actual movement isn't good, you're still technically, you're activating those muscles, you're engaging them and pushing them harder, okay, and that's really what's going to get the gains, the improvements. So the next fix is discipline and intention, okay, and this relates to exactly what I just said, where you need to have the intention straight away of working, focusing on that range of motion. Don't worry about your reps, don't worry about what exercises you're doing, don't worry about what your mate's doing, your training partner, that stranger who keeps eyeing you up at the gym. Don't worry about what they think, okay, you're working for you. So that discipline, that intention comes from you. You need to focus on it. Don't worry about them. If you have to do negatives, there's nothing embarrassing about negatives. Most people can't do pull-ups, so don't worry about that. If it looks weird, you do that shoulder isolation between your exercises, or you focus on that as a separate part of your rep. It might look a bit strange, but trust me, in 4 weeks, when you come back to the gym and they see you again, the difference is going to be insane, because you've focused on something. They're still doing the reps, you're still doing the reps, you having your better range of motion, you working on that and focusing on that is going to get you better results, okay? And not just in your pulls, but like physiological results, like your body's actually going to be looking better because you're working everything, all those bits, all those isolated parts, you're working that full range of motion, focusing on all these little things that compound and have a massive effect on your training. So yeah, I guess that's about it really. I'm just rambling now because I'm kind of summing it up. Guys, what's important is that you focus on your range of motion. All right, I've rambled a lot in this episode. I'm sorry about that. There's not a lot it's not a very sexy subject. It's not particularly exciting, but it's really important that you focus on this stuff. All right, in 3 months, in 6 months, you'll be thanking me for doing this, for actually focusing on this. Is so important. Everything that I do, I think of the range of motion. How far am I moving? Trying to push it, okay, because it matters and it's going to literally compound your results. All right, guys. Sorry for the ramble again. I kind of got away with it. I would have got away with it. That is it for this episode. If you like what you heard, as always, give us a like, a subscribe, share us with your mates, training partners, and anyone else who just needs a couple of little calisthenics tips or a reminder that range of motion matters, to be moving as far as you can in your exercises. All right? Yeah, I guess that's kind of it. If you got any questions, comments, reach out to me. Best place is just direct message me on Instagram. We can have a conversation. I'm a human being. Otherwise, at More Than Lifting everywhere else. And I'll catch up with you soon. Keep in touch with yourselves.